I was 19 the last time I saw Kenny's face clearly, standing under the fluorescent lights of the old theater lobby, holding his large cherry Coke like it was the only thing anchoring him to the world. That was 12 years ago, almost to the day. I'd just finished my final shift before leaving for college, packing up the last of the popcorn bags, wiping down the counters one more time, even though nobody would notice or care. He came through the line like always, same high-waisted khakis, same stutter when he asked for the usual, same lazy eye that never quite met mine, but always seemed to find me anyway. I smiled the way I'd trained myself to smile at him, polite, brief, distant enough to keep the space between us. He paid, said thank you in that careful way he had, and left. I didn't think much of it. I was already counting the hours until I could load my car and disappear down the interstate, windows down, radio loud, the kind of drive where you feel like you're outrunning everything behind you. I didn't see him again after that summer. Not at the gas station on the edge of town, not driving past the house when I came back for a weekend visit, not lingering in the parking lot of the grocery store where my mom still shopped. My family moved out of state a couple years later, my dad got transferred, my mom wanted a fresh start somewhere warmer, and I stayed gone. New city, new apartment that smelled like fresh paint instead of stale popcorn, new job answering phones for a small marketing firm until I could figure out what I actually wanted to do. I met someone kind who didn't ask too many questions about the past, who laughed easily and remembered the little things without making a show of it. We got married in a courthouse on a Tuesday because neither of us likes crowds or attention. Our daughter turned 2 last month. She has my eyes and his patience, and every time she reaches for me with those sticky little hands, I feel something settle inside me, something I didn't know was still rattling around loose. This morning I took her to Target because we were out of diapers and she decided the only acceptable breakfast was the blueberries in the little plastic clamshell packs they keep by the registers. She was in the cart seat, kicking her legs against the metal frame, pointing at everything shiny. The holiday lights strung across the ceiling even though it was still weeks until Thanksgiving. The stacks of brightly colored storage bins, the rows of greeting cards with cartoon animals. I was tired, hadn't slept more than 4 hours in a stretch since she started teething again, but the routine felt safe. Push the cart, grab what we need, smile at the cashier who always asks how old she is, go home, make lunch, nap when she naps. I turned down the aisle with the paper goods, reached for a pack of toilet paper, and stopped short. He was standing maybe 15 feet away, in the self-checkout lane closest to the exit. Same droopy eye, heavier now around the edges, hair thinner on top but still combed the same careful way with too much gel. Same high pants cinched above the natural waistline. He had a small basket, cereal box, gallon of milk, a package of paper plates, and he was looking straight at me. Not past me, not around me, at me. The smile came slow, like he'd been practicing it in a mirror for years, lips pulling back just enough to show teeth that looked the same as they did back then. He raised his hand in a small wave, fingers barely moving, the way someone does when they're not sure if you'll wave back but they're going to try anyway, like the gesture itself is enough to close 12 years of distance. I didn't wave. I didn't breathe for a second. My daughter started babbling at a bag of goldfish crackers on the shelf, reaching for it with both hands. I turned the cart hard, wheels squeaking against the tile, and pushed us toward the opposite end of the store. My pulse wasn't racing the way it does in movies, just this steady, heavy thudding behind my ribs, like someone had turned up the volume on my own heartbeat and forgotten to turn it back down. I kept my head down, pretended to look at laundry detergent, then cleaning supplies, then the clearance rack of holiday wrapping paper nobody buys until December. Just moved. Kept the cart between us like a shield. Kept her between us too. Her small body, a soft barrier I hadn't realized I needed until right then. When I glanced back, he was still at the self-checkout, scanning items slowly, but his head was tilted in my direction. Watching without watching. The kind of watching that doesn't need to be obvious to work. I abandoned the cart near the pharmacy counter, right next to the blood pressure machine nobody ever uses. Didn't even try to explain to the employee who asked if I needed help finding something. I scooped my daughter out of the seat, held her against my hip even though she's heavy now, and squirmed when she's confused or tired. She started to fuss, a small whine building in her throat. I shushed her automatically, walked fast toward the doors on the far side of the store, the ones that open into the garden center with its rows of half-dead poinsettias and bags of mulch. Outside, the air was cold, sharp with the smell of potting soil and exhaust from the loading dock around the corner. I crossed the lot at an angle, not straight to my car, cutting between rows so the parked cars would block the line of sight if he decided to look out the front windows. My keys were already in my hand, fob pressed tight enough that the plastic dug into my palm. I hit unlock twice, slid her into the car seat, buckled her with shaking fingers that fumbled the straps twice, climbed in, locked the doors, started the engine. I didn't look in the rear view until I was out of the lot and on the main road, merging into traffic behind a delivery truck. No one behind me. No familiar face in any of the cars I passed. Just normal Thursday afternoon traffic. People going to lunch or picking up kids or running errands like nothing had changed in the last 10 minutes. My daughter had stopped fussing and was humming to herself, playing with the tag on her jacket the way she does when she's content. I drove straight to the police station 3 miles away. Not the closest one, the one I'd passed 100 times on the way to the grocery store and never had a reason to enter until today. Inside, it smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet that hadn't been cleaned since the 90s. The desk sergeant was a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a name tag that said, Reynolds. I told her everything in the order it came to me, starting with the theater 12 years ago, the cherry cokes every Friday and Saturday, the way he started showing up on Sundays and then weekdays too, the free ticket I gave him for Legally Blonde because it felt harmless, the parking lot conversation that ended with him saying he could take care of my boyfriend, the way he followed me home that night and sat in his car across the street with the engine off. The year of it all, the schedule changes at work, the manager's talk with him, the nights I made sure someone walked me to my car, the police who laughed it off as a crush that would run its course, the graduation flowers delivered to the house, the lake party where someone grabbed me from behind and my boyfriend ended up in the ER with a head wound nobody could explain. Then, the move, the silence that lasted 12 years, the new life I built piece by careful piece. Then today. Target. The smile. The wave. The way he looked exactly like he used to, only older. She listened without interrupting, typing notes into the computer in slow, deliberate taps. When I finished, she asked for his full name. I gave it. Kenneth something. Last name I only half remembered because he never used it at the theater, just Kenny on the name tag he wore crooked. She ran it through whatever system they have. Came back after a few minutes and said he had no active warrants, no recent arrests in this state or the one we'd left behind. She asked if he'd spoken to me today, threatened me, followed me out of the store. I said no, just looked at me, smiled, waved. She nodded like she'd heard variations of this story too many times to count. We can file a report, she said. It'll go in the system. If he contacts you, approaches you, anything like that, call us right away. But right now there's not much else we can do. No crime's been committed today. She slid a piece of paper across the counter with a case number on it. Keep this, and maybe change up your routine for a bit. Different stores, different times, just to be safe. I thanked her, took the paper, walked back to the car with my daughter asleep against my shoulder now, her breath warm and even on my neck. Drove home. Unloaded groceries I didn't remember buying. Somehow I'd grabbed a few things on autopilot before I saw him. A loaf of bread, milk we didn't need, a box of cereal I'd never buy on purpose. Put everything away. Made dinner, pasta with sauce from a jar because I couldn't think straight enough to chop vegetables. Bathed her. Read the same board book about farm animals 3 times because she kept pointing at the cow and saying, moo, like it was the funniest thing she'd ever discovered. Now it's almost 2 in the morning. She's asleep in her crib down the hall. My husband is asleep beside me, snoring softly the way he does when he's really tired from a long day. The house is quiet, except for the refrigerator making that low hum it always makes at night, and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling in the cold. I'm sitting on the couch with my phone in my lap, screen off, staring at the dark living room window. The curtains are drawn, but there's a gap on the left side where the fabric doesn't quite meet the wall. I keep thinking I should get up and fix it, tug the panel over an inch so nothing can see in. I don't move. I don't know if he followed me from Target. I don't know if he knows where I live now, or if today was just chance. A small world getting smaller the way it sometimes does when you least expect it. I don't know if he's been here before, waiting in some parking lot I didn't notice, watching from across the street while I pushed my daughter on the swing at the park last week. or sitting in his car outside the pediatrician's office 2 months ago when she had an ear infection. I don't know anything except that the smile was the same, patient, familiar, like he'd never left, like 12 years was just a long intermission. I keep replaying the moment in the aisle, the way his hand lifted, small and deliberate, the way his eye found me and stayed. No words, no approach, just presence. The kind that doesn't need to speak to remind you it's there, that it remembers, that it waits. I changed my number once, years ago, changed jobs, changed states, changed everything I could think to change. And still, he was standing in Target today, holding a box of cereal like any other person running errands, like the years hadn't erased a single detail. I don't know what comes next. I just know I won't sleep tonight. Not really. I'll lie in bed listening to the house settle, to my daughter's soft breathing through the monitor, to the refrigerator, to the silence outside that feels heavier than it should. And every time a car passes on the street, I'll count the seconds until the taillights disappear, telling myself it's nothing, it's just traffic, it's just normal. But I'll keep counting, because the last time I stopped paying attention, he learned where I lived. I remember the exact moment I stopped believing in guardian angels. I was 23, standing on the platform at the international terminal, boarding pass crumpled in my hand, watching the gate agent scan tickets while families hugged and cried and waved like the world was ending right there. My backpack felt heavier than it should have, mostly textbooks I'd never open again, a few changes of clothes, the silver cross my grandmother pressed into my palm the night before I left. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the red bike parked somewhere near the curb, the rider in those mirrored aviators leaning against the handlebars, watching. But the curb was just taxis and shuttle vans and people in a hurry. No bike, no sunglasses. For the first time in a decade, the air around me felt empty in a way that almost hurt. The flight itself dragged on for what felt like days, turbulence shaking the plane over the dark Atlantic while I sat pressed against the window, forehead to the cold glass, replaying every single sighting in my head like a reel I couldn't pause. I landed in the early morning, customs lines snaking forever, the air thick with coffee and cigarette smoke from the officers. The taxi driver spoke no English, and I spoke almost no Spanish yet, so we rode in silence through narrow streets that smelled of bread and sea salt until he dropped me at the apartment above the bakery. That first night, I left the windows cracked because the heat was unbearable, lay on the thin mattress listening for any scrape of tires or footsteps on the pavement below, and when none came, I slept deeper than I had in years, waking only when the bakery ovens started rumbling at dawn. Europe was kind to me in the beginning. Different language, different streets, different faces that didn't know my name or my history. I found an apartment above a bakery in a small city where nobody asked too many questions if you paid rent on time. I worked odd jobs, translating documents, tutoring English, eventually landing something steady at a nonprofit that dealt with migration paperwork. The routine was small and predictable, the kind of life that lets you breathe without thinking about every shadow on the sidewalk. I went to therapy once a week in a cramped office that smelled like chamomile and old books. The therapist was patient, gray-haired, never pushed when I went quiet. Over months, then years, I talked about the bike, the whispers under the window, the way I used to wake up at 3 a.m. certain someone was standing just outside the glass. She never called it romantic or harmless. She just listened and asked gentle questions until the memories started feeling more like stories I'd read than things that happened to me. 3 months after I arrived, I was walking to the market on a Saturday morning, basket on my arm, when I saw a red motorcycle parked at the curb 2 blocks ahead. Same make, same shine on the tank, same low seat. My stomach dropped so fast I had to stop and lean against a lamppost. People flowed around me, complaining in rapid Spanish. I made myself keep walking, slower now, eyes locked on the bike. When I got close enough to see the license plate, my knees almost gave out. It was local, different numbers, different rider altogether, a kid in his 20s adjusting his helmet. I stood there on the sidewalk for a full minute watching him pull away, engine growling, until the sound faded and the street felt normal again. I went home that afternoon and double-checked every lock, then sat on the floor with my back to the wall and cried without making noise, because even here, even thousands of miles away, My body still knew how to brace. I was 29 when I met him. A conference in Lisbon, dry policy panels about cross-border data sharing, bad coffee, name tags that kept curling at the edges. He was there from the Madrid office, tall, easy smile, emerald eyes that caught the light whenever he turned his head. His accent wrapped around words like it was doing them a favor. We were paired for a breakout session. I was supposed to show him the venue layout afterward. We ended up walking the wrong direction for half an hour, laughing about it, then finding a cafe with outdoor tables and ordering wine we didn't finish because we were too busy talking. His name was Tiago. He liked old jazz records, hiking in the Sierras when he visited family, cooking paella on Sundays, even though he always burned the bottom. I liked how he listened, really listened, without filling the silences with advice or platitudes. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to scan the room for a familiar silhouette. We didn't rush. Phone calls that stretched past midnight, messages throughout the day about nothing important, weekend visits that turned into week-long stays. One weekend, we drove up into the hills for a hike, the trail narrow and rocky, sun hot on our necks. Halfway up, I slipped on loose gravel and he caught my arm, steady, warm, and for a second I thought I heard the low idle of an engine somewhere below us on the road. I froze, turned, scanned the switchbacks. Nothing but our rental car and a couple of tourists. Tiago asked if I was all right. I said yes, just dizzy from the altitude. We kept walking. That night in the small hotel room, I lay awake, listening to the wind in the pines and his breathing beside me, telling myself the sound had been nothing, just my mind playing the old tape again. When he asked me to marry him, it was on a Tuesday evening in his apartment, rain tapping the windows, takeout containers on the coffee table, no ring because he said he wanted to pick one together. I said yes, without hesitation. The wedding was small. His parents, a handful of friends, a civil ceremony in a sunlit room overlooking the river. We bought a house on the edge of the city, white walls, tiled floors, a yard big enough for the dog we adopted 6 months later. Our son came 2 years after that. Dark hair like his father's, my stubborn chin, a laugh that filled every room he entered. Those years felt like borrowed time in the best way, ordinary, warm, mine. There were still nights, though, when I'd wake to the distant growl of a motorcycle on the highway and sit up fast, heart hammering, until Tiago would reach over half asleep and pull me back down, murmuring something soft in Spanish that always sounded a little like an old lullaby I couldn't quite place. Then the accident. A wet road, a curve he took too fast, the bike sliding out from under him. The call came while I was at the office, my phone buzzing on the desk beside a half-finished report. His mother's voice, shaking, telling me the hospital, the room number, hurry. I don't remember driving there. I remember the waiting room smelling of antiseptic and old magazines, the clock on the wall ticking too loud, the doctor coming out in green scrubs with that careful, practiced sadness on his face. I remember holding Tiago's hand in the ICU even though he was already gone, the skin still warm, the machines beeping their pointless rhythm until someone turned them off. The days after were fog. His mother came every morning with food I couldn't eat, held the baby when my arms shook too much to hold him steady. His father fixed things around the house that didn't need fixing. I moved through the motions, diapers, bottles, baths, because stopping felt like falling apart completely. One afternoon, his mother pulled out the old photo albums while the baby napped. She wanted to remember him young, she said. Wanted me to see the boy he'd been before life layered everything else on top. The pictures started innocent enough. First birthday, cake smeared across his cheeks. Tricycle in the driveway, helmet too big. School portraits with crooked ties and forced smiles. Then teenage years, sparser, like the family had started taking fewer photos or he'd started being away more. She flipped pages slowly, narrating small stories I'd never heard. He went to study abroad when he was 15, she explained. A program in the States. Not many pictures from that time. She turned another page, and there he was. Maybe 20, leaning against a red motorcycle, aviator sunglasses reflecting whatever was in front of him. Hair a little longer than he wore it later. That same easy posture I'd seen 1,000 times on different streets, outside different windows. I didn't gasp or cry out. The room didn't spin. I just stared at the photo until the edges blurred, until his mother noticed my stillness and asked if I was all right. I nodded, said something about dust in my eyes. She closed the album gently, patted my hand, went to check on the baby. I sat there holding the weight of it alone for a long minute, then excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, ran the tap cold and splashed water on my face until it stung. I stared at myself in the mirror, water dripping from my chin, and the pieces started clicking into place one by one, the way he always knew which songs calmed me, the way he'd sometimes whisper, "Sleep well, sweet angel," when he thought I was already drifting off, the way he never asked about my childhood in detail but seemed to understand every small fear without being told. I stayed in there until my hands stopped shaking, then went back out and helped clear the coffee cups like nothing had changed. I didn't tell anyone. Not his mother, not my therapist when I finally went back, not the friends who kept texting to see how I was holding up. What would I say? That the man I loved for 7 years, the man whose child I carried, whose hand I held through every small joy and every quiet night, was the same man who shadowed me from 13 to 23. That the whispers outside my window were his voice. That the reason he never approached, never touched, never demanded anything was because waiting was enough for him. Until it wasn't. Until he found a way to step inside the frame instead of staying on the edges. I keep the album on the shelf now, spine out, untouched. I don't look at it. I don't need to. The face is burned into me the same way the bike used to be. Red paint gleaming under streetlights, chrome catching moonlight, engine idling just loud enough to carry through the dark. I still wake up sometimes at 3 in the morning, listening for footsteps that aren't there anymore, for a whisper that never comes. The house is quiet. The dog sleeps at the foot of the bed. Our son breathes soft and even in the next room. But the silence feels different now. Not empty. Not safe. Just waiting. Last week I drove out to the curve where it happened, the road still marked with black skid lines that the rain hadn't washed away yet. I parked on the shoulder, got out, stood in the gravel looking at the guardrail he'd gone through. The drop wasn't steep, just enough. I stayed there until the sun started to set, then drove home slower than I needed to, checking the rear view every few seconds even though the road behind me stayed empty. I don't know if he planned it from the beginning or if it happened slowly, the way obsessions sometimes do. I don't know if the accident was really an accident or if he chose the road and the rain and the speed because he knew I'd never leave otherwise. I don't know why he let me go to Europe in the first place, why he waited 10 years to close the distance. I only know that for 7 years I slept beside him, kissed him good morning, built a life on top of a shadow I thought I'd outrun, and now the shadow is gone, but I'm still looking over my shoulder. Because even dead, some things don't stop watching. I was lacing up my running shoes in the hallway when the apartment felt smaller than usual, the air thick with the smell of last night's takeout still lingering on the counter and the faint metallic tang of the radiator kicking on for the first time this fall. Jacob was in the living room, scrolling on his phone, legs stretched across the couch like nothing in the world was pressing down on him. I called out that I was going for a run, kept my voice light, casual, the way you do when you're trying to convince yourself as much as the other person. He looked up, eyebrows pulling together the same way they always did when he thought I was being stubborn about something stupid. He offered to come with me. I kissed him instead of answering right away, let my lips linger just long enough to soften the refusal, then told him I needed the alone time, that the path was busy, that I had pepper spray, and he had my location shared. He didn't argue after that, just watched me close the door with that quiet worry he never quite knew how to hide. 30 seconds down the stairs, out the side exit of the complex, and onto the sidewalk where the late afternoon sun was already slanting low through the trees, I felt the tug on my left arm before I even registered the shadow moving in from the side. It wasn't a grab, it was a yank, sharp and practiced, hard enough that my shoulder popped and my momentum carried me sideways into the narrow alley between the apartment building and the next one over. My back hit brick. My wrists were pinned above my head in one of his hands while the other clamped over my mouth, leather glove tasting like old coins and sweat. I thrashed, elbows, knees, trying to drive my heel into his instep the way they taught in that self-defense class I took freshman year of college. but he was tall, solid, heavier than he looked from across coffee shop tables or supermarket aisles. The scar on his neck was right there, pale and jagged against tanned skin, close enough that I could see the faint raised edges where stitches must have pulled tight years ago. "Lily," he said, voice low, steady, almost gentle despite the way his forearm pressed across my collarbone to keep me still. "Keep quiet. I'm trying to help you." The name hit harder than the wall. I'd never told him my name, never spoken to him beyond that first rejection at the coffee shop 2 months ago. I bucked again, muffled curses vibrating against his palm, but he didn't flinch. He waited, patient, until my arms started to burn and my lungs screamed for air I couldn't quite pull in deep enough. When I finally went still, not because I wanted to, but because my body was done fighting, he eased the pressure on my mouth just enough that I could breathe through my nose. "Are you going to listen?" he asked. I shook my head once, slow, defiant. He sighed, the sound tired more than frustrated, like he'd rehearsed this moment and still hated how it was playing out. "Lily, I need you to take this seriously, okay? The man you're dating, Jacob, he's not Jacob. Not anymore." The words landed flat at first, nonsensical, the kind of thing you hear in a bad dream and wake up laughing at how absurd it was. But he didn't laugh. He didn't smirk or wink or do any of the things he'd done the first time he'd stepped into my path. He just held my gaze, brown eyes steady behind the faint sheen of sweat on his forehead, waiting for the meaning to sink in. I managed to get my mouth free enough to speak, voice hoarse and small. "What the hell does that mean?" He glanced toward the mouth of the alley, quick, automatic, checking for witnesses. Then back to me. "It means the person in your apartment right now isn't the same person you started dating 6 months ago. The real Jacob disappeared 2 months back, right around the time you first saw me." I laughed then, short and bitter, the sound scraping my throat. "You're insane. You've been following me for weeks. You know my routines, my coffee order, my name somehow. And now you're telling me my boyfriend's been, what, replaced? Like some sci-fi bullshit?" "Not replaced," he said quietly. "Taken." And the thing wearing his face moved in. "I've been trying to get close enough to warn you without him noticing me first." I stared at him. The scar, the brown hair that was always neatly combed in every glimpse I'd caught. The height that made him easy to spot in a crowd, yet somehow impossible for Jacob to see when I pointed. My mind raced through the last 2 months. The way Jacob had started sleeping heavier, waking later. The small changes in his laugh that I'd chalked up to stress from work. The way he never quite met my eyes when I asked about his day anymore. I pushed the thoughts away hard. "You're lying," I said. "You're the threat here. You attacked me. I restrained you because you were about to run straight back to him, and I needed 30 seconds to say this before he starts wondering why your run is taking longer than usual." He loosened his grip on my wrists, but didn't let go completely. "Check his phone, not the lock screen, the deleted messages folder, the ones he thinks are gone. Look for the number that starts with 555. It's a burner. There are photos there. Not of you. Of the real Jacob, tied up, alive at first, then not." My stomach turned over. I wanted to scream, to knee him, to run, but my legs felt locked in place, knees soft. "Why should I believe anything you say?" "Because I've been watching him too," he answered. "I saw him take Jacob. I saw him clean the apartment afterward, move things around so it looked normal. I've been trying to get evidence, trying to get close enough to you to explain without him realizing I'm onto him. Every time I got near, he made sure you never saw me with him. Made it look like you were imagining things, gaslighting you so you'd doubt yourself before you ever doubted him." I swallowed. My mouth was dry, lips cracked from pressing against leather. "If this is true, why not go to the police?" I did, twice. Once when I first saw the switch, once after I followed him to the storage unit where he's keeping what's left. They laughed me out of the station, said I was jealous, said I was making up stories because you turned me down at the coffee shop. No body, no crime, no proof they'd accept. He finally released my wrists. I didn't run. I rubbed the skin where his fingers had pressed, feeling the blood rush back in pinpricks. "What do you want from me?" I want you to get out. Tonight. Pack a bag while he's in the shower or asleep. Go to a hotel, go to a friend's, go anywhere that isn't there. Don't confront him. Don't let him see you packing. Just leave. I'll follow at a distance. Make sure he doesn't tail you. Once you're safe, we can figure out the next step. Police again. Maybe a private investigator who won't dismiss it. But you have to move now. I looked past him to the alley mouth. The sidewalk was still busy. Joggers, dog walkers, kids on scooters. Normal life 10 feet away. Inside the apartment, Jacob was probably still on the couch, waiting for me to come back sweaty and flushed and tell him the run cleared my head. I thought about the scar on this man's neck again. The way it looked old but deliberate, like someone had tried to open him up once and hadn't quite finished the job. If you're lying, I said slowly, I'll make sure you never get near me again. If I'm telling the truth, he answered, and you stay, you won't get another chance to leave. He stepped back then, hands loose at his sides, giving me space. I didn't thank him. I didn't curse him. I just turned and walked out of the alley, legs unsteady but moving, back toward the stairs, back toward the door I'd closed 20 minutes ago like it was any other afternoon. I didn't look behind me to see if he followed. I didn't need to. Because when I reached the landing and paused with my key halfway to the lock, I heard Jacob's voice through the door, soft, casual, calling my name like he'd been waiting. And for the first time in 2 months, the sound of it didn't feel like home. I turned the key anyway, pushed the door open with my shoulder, and stepped inside like everything was still ordinary. Jacob was exactly where I'd left him, phone in hand, legs still stretched out, but he looked up the second the latch clicked and gave me that same half-smile he always did after I'd been out. "How was the run?" he asked, voice easy, like the words had been waiting on his tongue the whole time I was gone. I mumbled something about it being fine, legs a little sore, and headed straight for the kitchen to grab a glass of water so I wouldn't have to meet his eyes right away. My hands were shaking when I filled the glass. The water sloshed over the rim and pooled on the counter. I wiped it up with a paper towel, crumpled the towel tight in my fist, and told myself to breathe, to act normal, to buy 30 more seconds while I figured out what the hell I was actually going to do. He got up from the couch a minute later, stretched, and said he was going to jump in the shower before dinner. Perfect. The water started running almost immediately, the pipes groaning the way they always did in this old building. I waited until I heard the shower curtain rattle closed, then moved fast, quiet but fast, toward the bedroom where his phone was still charging on the nightstand. My thumbprint still worked on the lock screen. He'd never changed it. I opened the Messages app, scrolled to the recently deleted folder the way the stranger in the alley had told me, and there it was. A number starting with 555, no name attached, a thread of texts that made my stomach fold in on itself. Photos attached. The first one was Jacob, my Jacob, sitting on a concrete floor in what looked like a storage unit, wrists zip-tied behind his back, mouth taped, eyes wide and terrified. The next photo showed the same scene but with fresh blood on his temple. The last one showed him slumped, eyes closed, the tape gone, head at an angle that didn't look right. I almost dropped the phone. My thumb hovered over the images, zooming in, trying to convince myself they were fake, photoshopped, anything but real. But the details were too sharp. The stain on his favorite gray hoodie, the scar on his left knuckle from when he'd punched a wall in college, the exact watch I'd given him for his birthday. The shower water cut off sooner than I expected. I heard the curtain again, footsteps on the wet tile. I closed the app fast, locked the phone, set it back exactly where it had been, and turned toward the doorway just as he stepped out in nothing but a towel, hair dripping, skin still flushed from the heat. "You okay?" he asked, tilting his head the way the real Jacob used to when he could tell something was off. "You look like you saw a ghost." I forced a laugh that sounded thin even to me and said I was just hungry, that the run had taken more out of me than I thought. He nodded, said he'd throw on clothes and order pizza, and disappeared back into the bathroom to finish drying off. That was my window. I grabbed the small duffel from the closet shelf, shoved in whatever clothes my hands touched first, jeans, a hoodie, underwear, the charger for my phone, then zipped it shut as quietly as I could and slung it over my shoulder. My keys were on the kitchen counter, I snatched them, slipped my pepper spray into my pocket, and made it halfway to the front door before I heard his footsteps behind me. "Where you going?" he asked, voice still casual but with a new edge underneath, like he was trying to keep the mask from slipping. I didn't turn around at first. I just kept walking, hand on the doorknob, and said I was running to the corner store for milk because we were out. He crossed the room faster than I expected, bare feet quiet on the hardwood, and caught my wrist before I could twist the knob. "Lily, wait. You just got back from a run. You're shaking. Sit down. Talk to me." His grip wasn't hard yet, but it was firm, and when I tried to pull away, he didn't let go. I spun then, looked him in the face, and saw it. The small hesitation in his eyes, the way they flicked to the duffel on my shoulder for half a second before coming back to mine. "What's in the bag?" he asked, softer now, almost gentle, but the gentleness felt wrong, rehearsed. I yanked my arm free, stepped back, and the duffel strap slipped off my shoulder and hit the floor with a soft thud. He glanced down at it, then back up, and something shifted in his expression, the mask cracking just enough for me to see the calculation underneath. "You talked to him, didn't you?" he said, and the voice was still Jacob's, but the tone wasn't. Lower, colder. "The guy with the scar. He got to you in the alley, told you stories." I didn't answer. I just bent fast, grabbed the duffel, and bolted for the door. He lunged, caught the strap, and yanked hard enough that I stumbled backward into the coat rack. Coats and scarves rained down around us. I swung the duffel like a weapon, catching him across the side of the head. He grunted but didn't go down. Instead, he grabbed my shoulders, spun me, and pinned me against the wall beside the door the same way the stranger had done in the alley. Only this time, the hands felt familiar, and that made it worse. "You don't understand," he hissed, breath hot against my ear. "I fixed everything. I made it right. He wasn't good for you. He never noticed the little things the way I do." I drove my knee up between his legs as hard as I could. He doubled over with a sharp exhale, grip loosening just enough for me to shove him off, wrench the door open, and run. The hallway blurred past me, doors, elevator, stairs. I took the stairs two at a time, duffel banging against my hip, lungs burning. Behind me I heard the apartment door slam, and his footsteps pounding after me, heavy and fast. I hit the lobby, pushed through the glass doors into the cooling evening air, and kept running toward the street. The stranger was there, waiting exactly where he'd said he would be, leaning against a dark sedan parked at the curb, engine already running. He saw me coming, opened the passenger door without a word. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and he was already pulling away when Jacob burst out of the building, shirt half-buttoned, eyes wild, scanning the street. The stranger floored it, tires squealed, the car shot forward, and in the side mirror I watched Jacob run into the road after us, shouting something I couldn't hear over the engine and the blood roaring in my ears. We didn't speak for the first 10 blocks. I sat there clutching the duffel to my chest, breathing hard, watching the mirror to see if headlights were following. The stranger drove like he knew the city better than I did. Side streets, alleys, quick turns that made my stomach lurch. Finally, he said, "Storage unit's 10 minutes from here. You still want proof?" I nodded because I didn't trust my voice yet. He didn't ask again. We pulled into an industrial park on the edge of town, chain-link fence, rows of identical orange doors glowing under sodium lights. He parked at the far end, killed the engine, and handed me a small flashlight from the glove box. "Unit 47, bottom row. I'll stay here and watch the entrance. If you hear a car, run straight back." I got out on legs that still felt like someone else's. The air smelled of diesel and damp concrete. My footsteps echoed between the units as I walked down the row, counting numbers until I reached 47. The padlock was new, shiny, not the rusty one I remembered from when Jacob had stored his old bike here last summer. I used the key the stranger had given me earlier. When had he given it to me? I couldn't remember, and the lock clicked open. The door rolled up with a metallic rattle that seemed louder than it should have. Inside, the beam of the flashlight caught metal shelves, cardboard boxes, a tarp draped over something large in the corner. I stepped in, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth, and pulled the tarp back. Clothes. Jacob's clothes, his gray hoodie with the blood stain, the watch I'd given him, A pair of sneakers I recognized from the photos, and beneath them, on the concrete, dark stains that hadn't been cleaned well enough. I didn't touch anything. I just stood there, flashlight shaking, until I heard tires on gravel outside. The stranger's voice called my name, urgent. I dropped the tarp, ran back out, and saw headlights sweeping the far end of the lot. The stranger was already in the car, door open. I dove in. He reversed hard, spun the wheel, and we shot out the exit just as the other car, Jacob's car, turned into the row we'd just left. We drove for hours after that, switching cars at a friend's garage he knew, ditching the first one in a long-term lot at the airport. He took me to a motel on the outskirts, paid cash, gave me the key to room 12, and said he'd be in 13 if I needed him. I sat on the edge of the bed with the lights off, phone in my lap, staring at the blank screen. I called the police from the room phone, told them everything in a voice that sounded like it belonged to someone else. Storage unit, photos, the chase. They took a report but said they'd need more than my word to search anything. I hung up, lay back on the stiff pillow, and listened to the hum of the vending machine outside and the occasional car passing on the highway. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the corridor. Slow, deliberate. They stopped outside my door. I held my breath, waited. A soft knock. The stranger's voice, low. "You all right in there?" I didn't answer. After a minute, the footsteps moved on to the next room. I stayed awake until dawn, watching the thin line of light under the door, wondering how long it would take for the man who wore Jacob's face to find me again, wondering if the stranger in room 13 was really trying to save me, or if he'd been waiting for this exact moment all along. The dread didn't feel like panic anymore. It felt like gravity, steady, pulling, impossible to outrun. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw that gray hoodie with the stain, the watch still ticking on a concrete floor, and the way Jacob, my Jacob, had looked at the camera in those photos like he was waiting for me to come find him. I haven't slept since. I was still catching my breath from the 4-mile approach hike when I dropped my pack beside the small clearing that would be home for the night. The trailhead parking lot had been empty except for my car, and the last 3 hours of walking had been nothing but pine needles underfoot. The occasional flash of sunlight through the canopy, and that clean, sharp smell of resin and damp earth that always made the city feel like a distant memory. I'd chosen this spot because it was far enough off the main routes that I wouldn't see another person until I finished the 15-mile loop tomorrow, if I even finished it. I liked the solitude. I liked the way the quiet pressed in until all I could hear was my own breathing and the wind moving through the branches overhead. The old man in the last town had asked what I was doing out here, his face tightening when I told him, but I'd laughed it off the way I always did when people worried about a woman hiking alone. He was ancient, bent over a cane, no way he could have followed. I set up the tent quickly, stakes driven in with the heel of my boot, rainfly taut against the possibility of an afternoon storm. After that, I wandered down to the creek that ran parallel to the trail, 20 yards away, water clear and cold enough to make my fingers ache when I dipped them in. I sat on a flat rock, let my feet dangle, and for a while just watched the current carry leaves downstream. That was when I heard the snap. Not loud, but deliberate, the kind of sound a dry branch makes when weight shifts onto it instead of snapping underfoot by accident. I froze, eyes scanning the far bank, the tree line beyond. Nothing moved at first. Then a small scrap of fabric, pale, maybe gray, caught the breeze and drifted a few feet before snagging on a low branch. Behind it, half hidden by ferns and shadow, a shape resolved itself into shoulders, a head turned slightly away. Human, tall, male. I didn't scream. I didn't stand. I just sat there, heart thudding steady but hard against my ribs, watching him watch me. He stayed motionless for maybe 10 seconds, long enough that I started to wonder if he was as surprised as I was. Then he bolted, 3 long strides north, ducking under branches, vanishing into the thicker undergrowth like he'd never been there. The leaves kept swaying where he'd passed, but the forest swallowed the rest. My mouth tasted like copper. I thought about how I'd been considering stripping down to rinse off in the creek, how I'd already peeled off my socks and left them drying on the rock. I thought about how far I was from the car, how dark it would be in 2 hours, How the trail back was familiar but not foolproof in the dark. I could pack up now, hike out while there was still light. But the idea of stumbling along that narrow path with my headlamp flickering and him somewhere behind me made my skin crawl in a different way. Or I could stay. Trust that he was just some local who'd wandered too far, that he'd seen me and left because he realized he'd crossed a line. People do stupid things in the woods all the time. I'd done stupid things too. I stayed. I cooked dinner over the small stove, pasta from a pouch, nothing fancy, and ate sitting with my back to the tent, facing the direction he'd run. The pepper spray stayed clipped to my waistband. I even practiced drawing it once, thumb on the safety, finger off the trigger until I needed it. When the light started to fail, I read for a while by headlamp inside the tent, pages of a paperback I'd read before so the words wouldn't demand too much attention. Every few minutes I clicked the light off and listened. Nothing but crickets, the creek, the occasional barred owl calling from deeper in the trees. Eventually I turned the lamp off for good, zipped into my sleeping bag, and tried to convince myself the fear was just adrenaline wearing off. I don't know how long I drifted before something pulled me awake. Not a sound exactly, but a feeling. The way you wake up when someone's standing too close even if they haven't touched you. My eyes were open in the dark, pupils wide, searching the nylon ceiling. I didn't reach for the headlamp. Some instinct told me light would only make me more visible, more of a target. Instead, I lay still, breathing shallow, listening until I heard it. The softest exhale, close enough that it had to be right outside the tent mesh. I moved slowly, inch by inch, until I could unzip the sleeping bag without rustling the fabric too much. Shoes next, slipped on without tying. Then the small day pack I kept beside me with water, phone, keys. I crawled to the tent door, eased the zipper down tooth by tooth, and slipped out on my knees into the cool night air. The clearing was silver under moonlight filtering through the canopy. I scanned the tree line in sections, left to right, slow, letting my eyes adjust. Nothing. Then the whisper came again, from behind me this time, low and urgent. "You have to leave." I spun so fast my knee cracked against a root. There, crouched at the edge of the ferns maybe 10 feet away, was a woman. Thin nightgown hanging loose on her frame, hair long and pale, face half-shadowed but unmistakably female. She didn't move toward me. She just repeated it, louder this time. "You have to leave." The scream lodged in my throat like a stone. I scrambled backward, grabbed the daypack strap and ran. Didn't look back, didn't stop to zip the tent or grab the big pack or anything else. Branches slapped my face, roots caught my toes, but I kept moving toward where I thought the trail was, headlamp off because turning it on felt like painting a bullseye on my back. My lungs burned. My mind kept flashing to the man I'd seen earlier, 6 feet at least, the way he'd sprinted, and to the woman behind me, wondering if she was following, if he was circling around to cut me off. I tripped once, skinned my palms on gravel, got up, and kept going. The trail appeared eventually, faint ribbon of dirt under moonlight, and I followed it downhill, praying I was headed the right way. I don't remember most of the miles back to the car, just the rhythm of my feet hitting ground, the stitch in my side, the constant expectation that hands would close around my ankle at any second. Once I thought I heard footsteps keeping pace off to the side, parallel but never closing in, and I pushed harder, legs screaming, until the sound, if it had ever been real, faded behind me. When the parking lot finally appeared, my beat-up hatchback still the only vehicle there, I almost cried. Keys were in the day pack. I fumbled them out, unlocked the door, threw myself inside, slammed it, hit the locks. The engine turned over on the first try. I sat there for a full minute with my forehead on the steering wheel, breathing in short gasps before I could make myself put it in gear and drive. An hour later, cell service returned in weak bars. I found a hostel compound off the highway, shared dorms, communal kitchen, the kind of place I usually avoided because I liked my privacy. Tonight I wanted people. I paid cash for a bunk, showered under scalding water until my skin turned pink, then crawled into the thin sleeping bag they provided and listened to the soft snores and rustles of strangers around me. For once the noise felt safe. In the morning, I told the story to a small group of hikers over instant coffee in the common room. They listened wide-eyed, asked questions, offered to go back with me to retrieve my gear because leaving thousands of dollars in food and equipment felt insane. The owner, a wiry man in his 60s with a faded tattoo of a compass on his forearm, overheard and shrugged when someone asked if the area was known for trouble. "Only one family lives out that way," he said. "Old homestead, been there generations. The woman you saw, probably one of them, harmless, mostly. Keeps to herself." I asked why she'd crept into my campsite in a nightgown at 2 in the morning. He thought about it, rubbed his jaw. "Don't know. But if she told you to leave, she probably had a reason." We drove back in 2 cars, me, 3 other hikers who'd volunteered, all of us armed with bear spray and nerves. The trail looked different in daylight, ordinary, almost pretty. My big pack was still where I'd left it, tent still standing, rainfly undisturbed, but everything inside had been touched, not ransacked, neatly arranged. Food packets stacked by type, stove fuel canister wiped clean and placed upright, sleeping bag folded with military precision, even my paperback open to the page I'd been reading. Bookmark moved to the next chapter like someone had finished the section for me. Nothing stolen, nothing broken, just handled, known. One of the hikers picked up my water bottle and turned it over in his hands. "This was knocked over when we left yesterday," he said quietly. "Now it's standing straight." We all looked at each other. No one had an answer that didn't feel thin. I packed it all up while the others stood watch, scanning the trees. No one saw anything. Before we left, I turned toward the tree line where the woman had crouched the night before and mouthed, "Thank you," tipping my hat the way my grandfather used to when he passed someone on a dirt road. I don't know if anyone was watching. I don't know if it mattered. On the drive back to the city, I kept checking the rear view, half expecting to see a pale figure on the shoulder or a tall shape slipping between the pines at the edge of the highway. Nothing. But the feeling stayed, a low hum under my skin that made every shadow in the apartment that night feel a little too solid. I slept with the lights on for a week. Then the dream started. Running through the dark, the woman's whisper in my ear, the man's silhouette always just out of reach. I went back to work, answered emails, paid bills, but the woods kept calling in a different way now. Not the old pull toward solitude, but something sharper, like unfinished business. A month later, I drove out again. Same region, but a different trail. Busier, with weekend crowds. I told myself it was to prove I wasn't afraid. Halfway up the switchbacks, I stopped to catch my breath and caught a glimpse of pale fabric moving between the trees far below. Too far to be sure, but the shape was wrong for a hiker. I stood there for a long time, watching. Nothing else moved. That night in my tent at the established campground, I lay awake listening to the distant laughter from other sites and the occasional crack of a branch. Around 3, I heard it again, the soft exhale just outside the mesh. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I whispered back, so quietly I barely heard myself. "Thank you." The exhale stopped. After a minute, I heard footsteps retreating, slow and careful, heading downhill. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, but I didn't feel terror either. Just a strange, heavy gratitude mixed with the knowledge that someone, maybe the same woman, maybe someone else in that isolated family, had followed me again, had waited until I was alone, and had chosen to warn instead of harm. I still hike. I still camp alone sometimes. But I check my surroundings more carefully now, and I listen when the woods feel wrong. And every once in a while, on a quiet trail far from anyone, I catch myself glancing at the tree line and wondering if she's still out there, watching from a distance, waiting to see if I need to be told to leave again. Sometimes I leave small things behind on purpose. A packet of instant coffee, a clean bandana, a note that just says, "Thank you," tucked under a rock. They're always gone the next morning. Nothing else is ever touched. The man I saw that first day never reappeared, at least not that I know of. Maybe he was the reason she risked coming so close. Maybe he still is. I don't go back to that exact clearing. I don't need to. The feeling follows me anyway, quiet and patient. The sense that somewhere in those deep woods, someone is still keeping watch. Not to hurt, but to make sure I never have to learn the worst thing that could have happened if she hadn't whispered in the dark. I've turned this over a million times since. The man in the woods could have been waiting for me to be vulnerable, alone, half-dressed, distracted. The woman could have been his accomplice, or she could have been something else entirely. Maybe she'd seen him following me all day and knew what he intended when I didn't. Maybe she'd risked coming close because she thought I wouldn't leave otherwise. Maybe the neat campsite was her way of saying she'd been there after he left, making sure nothing worse had happened while I was gone. Maybe the family out there has been doing this for generations, watching, warning, cleaning up after the ones who don't listen. I don't know. I only know that on the nights when the city feels too loud and the walls too close, I sometimes drive out to the edge of the forest, park where the pavement ends, and sit on the hood of my car listening to the trees. I never go in after dark anymore, but I sit there until the sky starts to lighten, and every time I do, I feel it, that low, steady presence just beyond the tree line. Not threatening, not gone, just there, watching, waiting, ready if I ever need to be told again. I was grading midterms in the empty lecture hall when the fluorescent lights overhead started buzzing louder than usual, the way they do right before one flickers out for good. The room smelled like chalk dust and the faint chemical tang of whatever cleaner the night crew used on the floors. I'd been alone for hours, the way I preferred it lately. Professor had taken to leaving early on Fridays, saying he trusted me with the night sections, and the students had scattered the second class ended. I liked the quiet. It let me think. Or at least it used to. Heath showed up that first time like he owned the place. Door creaked open halfway through my lecture on post-colonial theory, and there he was, tall, blue eyes sharp enough to cut glass, expensive jacket slung over one shoulder like he'd just stepped out of a catalog. He walked straight to the front, didn't even glance at the other 20 or so kids scattered across the rows. "Heathcliff Lynch," he said, hand out, grin crooked and practiced. I shook it because that's what you do when a student introduces himself politely, but his fingers lingered a second too long, thumb brushing the inside of my wrist. I pulled back, told him to sit, kept teaching, felt his stare the whole time, steady, unblinking, like I was the only thing in the room worth looking at. After that, he came every class. Always early. Always the same seat, front row, far left corner, perfect angle to watch me move behind the podium, to see under the desk if I crossed my legs wrong. He asked questions, good ones sometimes, the kind that made the other students nod like they were impressed. But mostly he just watched, never took notes, never looked away. When I turned to write on the board, I could feel the weight of it sliding down my back, my hips, my legs. It wasn't flattering, it was invasive, like being undressed in slow motion by someone who already knew what was underneath. Then the roses started showing up at the apartment. First one on the kitchen table, red, perfect bloom. My roommate laughed, said it had to be her boyfriend messing with her. Then another. Then 3. Then the Ziploc bag with the condom. Used. Tied off. Still damp when she handed it to me shaking. I told her it was probably Tommy, my ex who'd been calling too much last year before he finally stopped. She believed it because she wanted to. I didn't. Tommy was pathetic, not creative, and the roses weren't his style. I started arriving early to class on purpose. One evening the sun had just dropped behind the buildings when I walked in and found the room dark except for the exit sign glow. I flipped the lights, set my bag down, then sat in Heath's seat to see what he saw. The view was worse than I'd imagined. Straight up under the podium, the angle perfect if I wore anything shorter than knee length. I straightened fast, cheeks hot, and that was when I heard the soft scrape from beneath the desk. He crawled out like he'd been waiting for me to discover him. Same grin, same blue eyes. "Hey, Aaron." I jerked up so fast the chair tipped. He caught me by the waist before I could fall, pulled me in close enough that I smelled the weed under his cologne, thick and green. "Some teacher you are, Ms. Aaron, teasing me every class. You think I don't notice the way you wear your slutty clothes around me?" His breath was warm against my hair. I tried to push away. He held tighter. The skirt. The lip bite when I ask questions. Don't pretend you don't like the attention. I told him to let go. Told him I was his TA, not his fantasy. He laughed low, kissed my forehead like we were lovers. "I thought you liked my gifts. I asked about your favorite flowers last week. You said red roses." Then he pulled a fresh Ziploc from his pocket and pressed it into my hand. Inside, a finger. Clean cut. Ring still on it. Tommy's ring. The one he never took off even when we fought. My knees gave. He caught me again. "Don't be scared. Come here." He reached for me like I was supposed to take his hand. I did. And then I reached into my blazer pocket. The taser was small, discreet, something I'd carried since the job I lost a year ago, the job where I'd learned how to handle people who thought they could take what they wanted. I pressed it to his side, thumbed the trigger, felt the buzz through my palm as his body locked up. His eyes went wide, mouth open in a silent O. He dropped like a sack, but not before his hand clamped around my wrist, yanking me down with him. We hit the floor hard. My elbow cracked against the tile, his weight pinning my leg. He twitched, muscles seizing, but he was stronger than he looked, fingers digging in even as the current ran through him. I jammed the taser harder against his ribs, held it there until the battery whined and his grip finally slackened. His head lolled to the side, breath coming in shallow gasps. I lay there for a minute, chest heaving, listening to the lights buzz and the distant hum of the city outside the windows. Then I rolled him off me, stood up on shaky legs, and looked down at what I'd done. I called a cab from the hallway payphone because I didn't want the app on my phone showing the location. Told the driver my friend had passed out at a party, too much to drink. The guy helped me half carry him down the stairs, Heath's feet dragging, head bouncing against my shoulder, and loaded him into the back seat like a sack of laundry. I sat in the back with him, one hand on his pulse to make sure he was still breathing, the other in my pocket around the taser in case he woke up mid-ride. The driver kept glancing in the mirror, but didn't ask questions. When we reached my building, I paid cash, tipped heavy, and dragged Heath up 3 flights of stairs alone, stopping every few steps to catch my breath and listen for neighbors. My roommate's door was already locked and dark. She'd left for Seattle that morning, so the apartment was mine. I got him inside, kicked the door shut, and wrestled him into the desk chair in the spare room. Zip ties from the junk drawer went around his wrists first, then ankles, then a loop around his chest to keep him upright. He started coming around right as I finished the last one, eyelids fluttering, a low groan escaping before I pressed the tape over his mouth. He woke up fully then, eyes wild, body jerking against the plastic. The chair scraped across the floor as he thrashed, trying to tip it over, trying to scream through the gag. I stood back and watched for a minute, letting him tire himself out. When he finally went still, sweat beading on his forehead, I pulled up the other chair and sat across from him. "You shouldn't have followed me home," I said quietly. "You really shouldn't have left those things in my apartment." He shook his head, tried to talk. I didn't remove the tape. Instead, I went to the kitchen, came back with the small leather case I kept under the sink, the one from the old job. Knives inside, clean, sharp, the kind that don't make a lot of noise. I laid them out on the desk one by one, letting him see. His breathing changed, faster, panicked. I didn't rush. I traced the first line across his forearm, shallow, just enough to open the skin. Blood welled up slow, dark against his expensive watch. He bucked again, the chair leg scraping, but the zip ties held. I kept going, small cuts, precise, the way I'd been taught to make someone understand consequences without making a mess that couldn't be cleaned. He screamed into the tape until his voice gave out. When I reached his eyes, I paused, turned the desk lamp so the light caught them just right. They really were striking. I used the smallest blade for those, quick, controlled. The jars were already waiting in the closet, solution ready. The rest of him I handled methodically, wrapped, labeled, carried down to the chest freezer in the spare room in batches, the building quiet enough that no one heard the wheels of the small dolly I used on the hallway carpet. After the first night, I cleaned the spare room twice, bleach on the floor, the chair scrubbed until the plastic gleamed, the air freshener I left running until the smell of blood and fear was buried under artificial pine. I kept the eyes in the jars on the closet shelf, turned so they faced the door when I opened it each morning. Sometimes I'd sit on the floor in front of them, legs crossed, and talk quietly about the lectures he'd missed, the questions he'd never get to ask again. It wasn't regret. It was closure. The kind he'd never given me. Professor didn't ask questions when Heath stopped coming to class, just nodded when I told him the kid had dropped out, maybe transferred. A week later, he mentioned this website in passing, said people here dealt with problems like mine, said they might know people who could help with disposal or sales. I still had connections from the old job, but most of them went quiet after I got fired. The black market doesn't like loose ends. I posted anyway, kept it vague, friendly. The freezer's getting full. Heath's lungs and liver are probably worthless. Too much weed, too many pills. But the eyes are perfect. I keep them on the shelf in my closet, in their jars, where the light catches them just right. Sometimes I take one out at night, hold it up to the lamp, watch the way the pupil stays fixed no matter which direction I turn it. He's still looking at me. Always looking. My roommate comes back in 2 days. I need to move things. Fast. I've got the number for a guy Professor mentioned. Discreet. Cash only. Doesn't ask where the product came from. Last night I drove out to the storage unit I rented under a different name, loaded the cooler into the trunk, checked the seals twice. On the way back, a patrol car sat at the light beside me and I kept my hands at 10 and 2, smiled when the officer glanced over. He smiled back. Nothing suspicious. Just a TA running errands. When I got home, I sat in the dark for a while, staring at the jars, thinking about how quiet the apartment is now. No more roses, no more Ziploc bags, no more eyes on me in class. Just the low hum of the freezer and the faint smell of bleach I can't quite get out of the spare room carpet. I'm not worried about getting caught. Heath's parents disowned him years ago. No one's looking. No one's asking. And if they did, I'd just tell them he finally got what he wanted. To be close to me. To see me every day. I still carry the taser. I've gotten better with the knives. And if anyone else decides to leave gifts at my door or stare too long across a lecture hall, I'll be ready again. The freezer has room. The jars are small. And I've learned how to make the mess disappear before the roommate even notices the extra locks on the spare room door. I'm friendly. I'm careful. I just need someone who can move what's left before the smell starts. If you're reading this and you know people, message me. I don't have much time. And if you're thinking about approaching me the way he did, don't. I still carry the taser, and I've gotten better with the knives. I was parked 3 spaces down from her usual spot when she pulled in that night, headlights cutting across the cracked asphalt like they always did. Same time, same angle. The little silver sedan easing into the numbered space with the same soft crunch of gravel I'd heard a dozen times before, the sound so familiar now that it almost felt like part of my own routine, the way my own car door used to sound when I got home from the furniture store after a long shift. I'd been following her long enough now that the routine felt almost comforting in a way that made me uneasy when I let myself think about it too hard late at night, her car turning in, engine ticking as it cooled in the damp evening air. Her silhouette stepping out with that quick, tense stride she had lately, shoulders hunched against the chill, like the weight of whatever she was carrying was finally starting to press down on her in a way she couldn't shake off anymore. Her bag slung across her back a little heavier than usual, or maybe it just looked that way because of how she was moving. I stayed low in my seat, phone screen dimmed to a faint glow so it wouldn't reflect off the windshield and give me away, thumb hovering over the text thread with Connie. The same thread that had been growing longer and longer with each passing week, each new photo, each new timestamp I sent over at the end of every shift, the little envelope icon filling up with evidence I kept telling myself was helping someone even when the nights started to blur together, and I caught myself wondering what Sally was thinking when she looked at the same buildings I was staring at from my car. Another night of watching, another $100 in my pocket tomorrow when I handed over the notes and the blurry photos I'd snapped from across the street. The ones where Sally's face was half hidden by streetlight glare, but still clear enough for Connie to nod and say, "Yes, that's her, keep going, you're doing great." Her voice always warm and grateful, like I was the only person she could count on anymore. The only one who really understood how important this was for her sister. She didn't go straight inside tonight. She stood by her car for a long minute, one hand on the roof like she needed the support to keep standing. The other clenched at her side so tight I could see the knuckles whiten even from where I sat 2 rows back, her breath visible in the cold air for a second before she seemed to make up her mind about something that had been weighing on her all day. Then she started walking, fast, purposeful, cutting across the parking lot toward the side street instead of heading for the apartment door the way she had every other night I'd watched her. Her bag swinging with every step like it held something heavier than usual, something that made her lean a little to one side to balance the weight. My pulse kicked up hard, the kind of sudden spike that makes your mouth go dry and your palms sweat against the steering wheel even though the heater was on low. This wasn't part of the pattern I'd mapped out in the notebook Connie had given me, the one with the neat columns for times and locations and little notes about Sally's posture, or whether she looked back over her shoulder, or how long she stayed parked across from the sister's place. I waited until she was halfway down the block before I got out, locked the car as quietly as I could so the beep wouldn't carry on the wind, and fell in behind her, keeping to the shadows of parked vans and low hedges that lined the sidewalk, my sneakers quiet on the concrete, my breath shallow so I wouldn't make any extra noise. She didn't look back once. Her pace stayed brisk, head down, shoulders tight under her jacket, the bag bouncing like it was pulling her forward more than she was carrying it, and I matched her speed, staying a good 40-50 feet back the way Connie had drilled into me during that first long conversation on her couch, her voice soft but serious as she explained the rules over and over, close enough to keep her in sight, far enough that she wouldn't spot a tail unless she was looking for one, and even then she'd have to be looking hard because I was just another person walking home late, just another face in the city that blended into the background, nothing special, nothing worth noticing. She crossed the main road against the light, slipped down a narrow service alley that smelled like dumpster grease and old rain and something faintly metallic I couldn't place, the kind of alley you avoid in daylight, let alone at night, then cut through a gap in a chain-link fence that bordered an abandoned lot I'd never seen her go near before, the kind of place the city forgot about years ago with weeds tall enough to brush against your knees and broken glass glinting under the distant streetlights and old tires half buried in the dirt. The fence was long, rusted in places, patched with faded blue tarps that flapped in the night breeze like they were trying to warn me away or maybe just mocking how far I'd already come for a paycheck that suddenly felt heavier in my pocket. I slowed, heart hammering now because this was new territory, off her usual routes, away from the sister's condo, away from the bars and the grocery store, and the places where she usually did her watching, the places where I could pretend this was all still harmless and just a job. I crouched near a tear in the fence, peered through, holding my breath so the sound wouldn't carry on the wind, my knees aching from the position. She was already 50 yards in, kneeling in the far corner where the weeds grew thickest and the moonlight barely reached, small shovel in her hands, digging fast and methodical, the blade flashing every time she lifted it, dirt piling beside her in a neat mound that grew higher with each scoop. Her movements steady like she'd practiced this, or maybe just needed it to be over quickly so she could get back to whatever normal life she still had left. I watched her work for what felt like forever, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, sweat starting to prickle under my arms, even though the air was cold, my thighs burning from staying crouched so long, the flashlight in my pocket heavy against my leg, until she stopped, wiped her forehead with the back of her arm, and pulled a dark metal box from her backpack. Small, maybe the size of a lunchbox, no markings I could see from here, but the way she handled it was careful, almost reverent, like whatever was inside mattered more than she wanted to admit. She set it in the hole, shoveled dirt back over it, tamped it down with her boot until the ground looked almost undisturbed, then stood and stretched like she'd just finished a chore she'd been putting off for weeks, her shoulders rolling back in a way that looked like relief mixed with something heavier she couldn't quite shake. I ducked lower as she turned, headed back toward the fence, the shovel already back in her bag, her footsteps quicker now like whatever she'd done had given her a second wind, or maybe just made her want to get as far away from it as possible before someone saw. My thumb was already on the send button before she even reached the gap, the message typed out in the dim light with shaking fingers. She's burying something in an abandoned lot off 14th. Small metal box. Do you want me to dig it up or keep following her? The reply came in seconds, the screen lighting my face for a dangerous half-second before I dimmed it again. Note the spot so you can find it later. Keep following her. We need more on her routine tonight. Stay safe. I exhaled, pocketed the phone, and slipped back to the sidewalk just as she emerged through the gap and started walking again. faster now, like the act of burying whatever was in that box had lightened something inside her, or maybe just made the weight shift to a different place she could carry a little easier for a few more blocks. I followed, legs moving on autopilot, mind already replaying the scene in the lot, the way her shoulders had relaxed the moment the dirt was smoothed over, the way she hadn't looked around once like she was sure no one was watching, and that thought sat in my stomach like something cold and heavy because I was watching. I was always watching now, and the money made it feel almost normal until moments like this when it didn't, when the digging felt too deliberate and the box too small to be nothing. That had been 2 nights ago. Tonight, I was back at the lot alone, shovel borrowed from my landlord's garage without asking because I didn't want to explain why I needed it at 11 at night, or why my hands were shaking when I took it. Flashlight dimmed to a thin red beam so it wouldn't carry across the empty streets, or draw eyes from the few houses still showing lights at the far end of the block. The fence tear was still there, the dirt still freshly turned if you knew exactly where to look, a small, darker patch in the sea of weeds that had already started to settle, but not enough to hide from someone who knew what they were looking for and had been thinking about it for 48 hours straight. I crawled through on my hands and knees, the chain link scraping against my jacket, heart loud in my ears, the metal box already heavy in my imagination before I even started digging, my breath coming short, because part of me didn't want to know what was inside, but the bigger part, the part that kept showing up for the envelopes of cash and the hugs from Connie, needed to see it, needed to understand why Sally had come here in the middle of the night. The mound came up quicker than I expected, soil darker, looser than the rest, and the box itself was heavier than it had looked from a distance, padlocked. No markings except a faint scratch along one edge like someone had tried to pry it once and given up in a hurry, the metal cold against my fingers when I finally lifted it free and set it on the ground beside me. I used the key Connie had texted me earlier, small, brass, no tag, just a photo of it on my screen that I'd stared at for a long time before deleting the message. And the lock popped open with a soft click that sounded too loud in the quiet, too final, like the last piece of something I couldn't take back. Inside, a burner phone, a folded sheet of paper, 3 Polaroids. The phone powered on without a passcode. The screen went straight to video. I hit play before I could think better of it. The red beam of the flashlight trembling over the screen as the footage started, the audio crackling to life. Grainy footage. A bedroom I recognized instantly. My parents' bedroom, the one with the ugly floral curtains my mom refused to replace no matter how many times I teased her about them. The one where I used to fall asleep on the floor during thunderstorms when I was little, and she would tuck an extra blanket around me. They were tied to the bedposts, gagged, eyes wide and terrified in the lamplight. My dad's face twisted in a way I'd never seen, my mom's shoulders shaking like she was trying to hold back tears. A figure moved into frame. Dark clothes, gloves, face turned away from the camera. The figure poured something from a metal can over the sheets, over their legs, the liquid glinting as it soaked in, the smell almost coming through the screen even though it was just video, the kind of smell that stays in your nose for days. My dad thrashed hard enough to rock the whole bed. My mom made a muffled sound that went straight through me like a blade twisting in my chest. The figure struck a match. The flame flared bright, orange, and hungry. Then my own voice came from the speaker, tinny but unmistakable. The same tone I used when I was nervous but trying to sound sure of myself. The same tone I'd used when Connie first asked me if I was sure I could do this job. Are you sure there's nothing wrong with me doing this? The match dropped. Fire bloomed across the bed in a whoosh I could almost feel through the screen. The flames climbing fast. The screams starting. Real. Raw. The kind that don't stop until the lungs give out. The kind that echo in your head long after the video ends. My dad's voice breaking first. My mom's lasting longer like she was trying to hold on for him, trying to say something through the gag. I dropped the phone. It kept playing on the dirt, the audio looping my words over the crackle of flames and the desperate, choking sounds of my parents burning alive, the camera shaking slightly like the person holding it was laughing or crying or both. And I sat there on my knees in the weeds, tears blurring everything, chest so tight I couldn't pull in a full breath. The red beam of the flashlight still pointed at the screen like it was the only thing keeping me anchored. I was still staring at the screen when I heard the footsteps behind me, Soft, deliberate, the crunch of gravel under careful boots, the sound stopping just far enough away that I knew whoever it was had been watching me for a while, maybe even before I started digging. I turned slow, the flashlight beam swinging wild for a second before I caught it and pointed it low, my hands shaking so bad the light danced across the ground. She was standing 10 feet away, small, 20s maybe, dark hair pulled back tight, eyes red like she'd been crying for hours without stopping, her face drawn and exhausted in a way that made her look older than she probably was. A gun in her right hand, badge in her left. The barrel was already up, steady on my center mass, the red dot of the flashlight trembling across her jacket as my hand shook. "Madison," she said, voice flat and tired like she'd been waiting for this moment longer than I had, like she'd already lived through it in her head 100 times and was just going through the motions now. "I'm going to need you to come with me." I didn't run. I couldn't. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, someone who hadn't just watched her parents die on a phone screen while her own voice narrated the whole thing like it was nothing, like it was just another job. The phone kept playing behind me, my parents' screams filling the empty lot, the sound bouncing off the chain link and the tarps like it was trying to escape into the night and find someone who could still help. The woman, detective, I guessed, didn't flinch at the sound. She just stepped closer, gun never wavering, the badge catching the red light for a second so I could read the name. Detective Ramirez, her thumb resting on the grip like she was ready for me to do something stupid. "Hands where I can see them, slowly." I raised them, dirt under my nails, shovel still in my right hand. I let it drop. It hit the ground with a dull thud that seemed to echo forever, the vibration traveling up through my shoes and into my knees. She moved in then, quick but careful, turning me around with a hand on my shoulder, the cuffs coming out of her belt with a metallic jingle that sounded too loud. "You burned them," she said as the metal clicked around my wrists. Not a question, just a fact she was laying out between us. "Your parents. I saw the video, heard your voice, saw you light the match. The timestamp matches the fire report exactly. The accelerant, the restraints, everything. The neighbor across the street had a camera. It caught the figure leaving the house. The height, the build, the way you walk when you're tired. It's you." I shook my head hard enough to make the world tilt, tears spilling over now, my voice cracking when I tried to speak. "I didn't. I wasn't there. I haven't seen them in months. I was working. I was following Sally. I was sitting in my car every night like Connie told me to. I was texting her updates. I was cashing the envelopes. I was saying the words she wanted me to say, but I wasn't there. I swear I wasn't there." "Save it." She gestured with the badge, her voice steady but not unkind, like she'd heard every version of this story before and was just waiting for the one that matched the evidence. "Turn around, hands behind your back." I turned, felt the cuffs click on, cold metal biting into my wrists, the ratchet sound loud in the quiet, the chain short enough that my shoulders pulled back uncomfortably, the position making my chest feel even tighter. She patted me down quick, efficient, found my phone, my keys, the folded paper from the box, the burner still playing on the ground. She stopped the video with her toe, the screams cutting off mid-breath, then tucked everything into her jacket without looking at it, her movements practiced like she'd done this too many times already tonight, like the weight of other people's boxes was starting to wear on her too. "You've been following Sally for weeks," she said as she marched me toward the fence gap, one hand on my elbow to keep me steady when my knees tried to buckle, her grip firm but not painful, her boots crunching beside mine. "I've been following you. Connie hired you to tail her sister Stalker, right? Except Sally wasn't the stalker. She was the mark. Same as you. Same as your parents. Same as everyone she decides needs to disappear. She sets up the pieces, pays the players, and then watches while they all dig their own graves, one box at a time, one video at a time, until the only voice they hear is their own telling them they deserve it." We reached the sidewalk. A plain gray sedan waited at the curb, lights off, engine already running, the interior dark and warm when she opened the back door. She buckled me in like I was a child, her hands careful around the cuffs, checking the fit so they wouldn't cut too deep. then slid into the driver's seat. The car started smooth, no siren, no lights. We pulled away from the lot slow, like any other late-night drive. But my mind was racing, flashing back to the first time I met Connie, the way she'd hugged me after I said yes, the envelope of cash she'd pressed into my hand every week like it was nothing, the way she'd looked at me with those sad, trusting eyes and said, "This is what we deserve," until I started saying it back without thinking, the words becoming a habit I couldn't break even when I was alone in my car at 2 a.m. watching Sally's windows, even when I started to feel sorry for Sally, even when I started to wonder if Connie's sister even knew any of this was happening. The detective drove for a long time without speaking, the city lights streaking past the window in orange and white blurs, the highway humming under the tires, the occasional car passing us with its headlights sweeping across the interior. Finally, she glanced at me in the rear view, her eyes meeting mine for a second, tired but steady. "Sally's dead. Throat cut in an abandoned school 2 nights ago. We found the box she buried, same kind as yours. Video of her mother burning alive. Audio of her own voice saying the same thing you said. This is what we deserve." She thought she was burying evidence against the woman who was stalking her ex, but it was all staged. Everything was staged. Rex, the sister, the boxes, the jobs. Connie doesn't pull the trigger. She just makes sure the gun is loaded and points it at the right person, then steps back and lets the person pull it themselves. I closed my eyes. Connie told me she didn't know Sally. She lied. The detective turned onto the highway ramp. Sally was following Connie's sister because Rex, Sally's ex, told her Connie's sister was stalking him. Rex told Connie's sister that Sally was the problem. Connie told you Sally was stalking her sister. Everyone got a job. Everyone got paid. Everyone got a box eventually. Everyone ends up digging or burning or burying until the video makes them believe they did it all themselves. Connie doesn't need to be there at the end. She just needs the recordings, the payments, the little notes that make you think you're the one who started it. The car slowed for an exit. The station sign glowed ahead, blue and cold, the building low and squat under the night sky. "What happens now?" I asked, voice cracking, the cuffs digging in when I shifted, the metal warm now from my skin. "Now you tell me everything you remember about Connie. Every conversation, every envelope of cash, every hug, every time she made you say, 'This is what we deserve.' Every detail about the nights you followed Sally, every text, every photo, and maybe, we find her before she finds someone else to pay to finish what she started. Maybe we stop the next box before it gets buried. Maybe we stop the next fire before it starts." I nodded once. The car pulled into the lot. Doors opened. Cold air rushed in. I stepped out. Somewhere behind me, in the dark, I knew another box was waiting. And I knew I'd bury it, because that's what we deserve. I was waiting for my latte at the counter when he first spoke to me, voice low and smooth like he'd practiced the line in the mirror. "You always order the same thing. It's kind of comforting." I glanced over, saw the expensive watch, the tailored coat, the smile that looked expensive too. Handsome in the way that makes you immediately suspicious, like he knew exactly how much effort it took to look that effortless. I gave him the polite half-smile people give strangers who are trying too hard and turned back to the barista. He didn't move. "I'm Caleb," he said. "You're Alice, right?" My name on his tongue made the air feel thinner. I hadn't told him my name. I hadn't even looked at him long enough for small talk. I took my cup, said nothing, and walked out. That should have been the end of it. A weird moment in a crowded coffee shop, forgotten by the time I reached the crosswalk. But when I got home that night, the porch light was on. I always turn it off before I leave. The bulb was new, bright enough to show the small envelope tucked under the doormat. No stamp, no address, just my name in neat block letters. Inside was a single photo, me, standing at the counter that morning, back to the camera, hand reaching for my drink. The timestamp in the corner matched the exact minute I'd been there. No note, no threat, just the picture. I stood on the porch longer than I should have, looking up and down the empty street, listening for footsteps that weren't there. Then I went inside, locked the door, checked every window, and tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. A creepy customer who'd followed me once, snapped a photo, left it as some kind of lame flirtation. I'd dealt with worse. I told myself I'd throw it away in the morning. The next morning, the envelope was gone from the kitchen counter where I'd left it. I searched the trash, the recycling, under the sink. Nothing. I told myself I must have thrown it out without remembering. But when I opened the fridge for milk, there was another photo taped to the inside of the door. Me asleep on the couch the night before, head tilted back, mouth slightly open, the living room lamp still on. The angle was from the hallway, close enough that whoever took it had been standing in my house. I stared at it until the cold air from the fridge made my fingers ache. Then I pulled it down, folded it small, shoved it in my pocket, and went to work like nothing had happened because stopping felt like admitting it was real. I started noticing the small things after that. The way my keys were always in the exact same spot on the hook even when I was sure I'd dropped them on the table. The way the thermostat was set to 72 every morning when I kept it at 68. The way my mail was sorted, bills on top, junk underneath, when I usually just grabbed whatever was there and threw the rest away. Nothing stolen, nothing broken. Just arranged, watched, known. I changed the locks, added a chain, bought a cheap camera that plugged into my phone and set it up in the living room, angled toward the front door. The first night it recorded nothing but shadows and the occasional car passing outside. The second night I woke up at 3 to the notification chime, motion detected. I opened the app with shaking hands. The feed showed my hallway, empty, lit only by the nightlight I kept plugged in for emergencies. Then a shadow moved across the frame, tall, deliberate. No face, just the shape of shoulders, the outline of a coat. The figure paused, turned toward the camera like he knew it was there, then stepped out of view. The recording ended. When I rewound it, the timestamp showed 3 minutes before the alert. 3 minutes he'd stood in my house before the camera even noticed. I called the police that morning. The officer who came was kind but tired. He looked at the footage, took notes, asked if I had enemies, exes, co-workers who might hold grudges. I said no. He said it could be a burglary that got interrupted, said to keep the camera on, change my routine, maybe stay with a friend for a few days. He didn't say much about the photos or the thermostat or the keys. He didn't need to. We both knew what it looked like. I stayed with my friend Mara for a week. Her apartment was small, loud, full of her roommate's music and her cat's claws on the furniture. I slept on the couch, woke up every time the building's heat kicked on, checked my phone for alerts that never came. No notifications, no motion detected, no shadows. Mara said maybe he'd given up. I wanted to believe her. On the 8th day, I went home to get more clothes. The place smelled the same, coffee grounds, laundry detergent, the faint citrus from the candle I'd burned 2 nights before the first photo appeared. I walked through every room, checked every closet, looked under the bed. Nothing out of place. The camera in the living room was still plugged in, memory card full. I pulled it out, plugged it into my laptop, started scrolling through the days I'd been gone. The first 48 hours were empty. Then, on the 3rd night, the feed showed my hallway again. Same nightlight, same shadows. The figure walked in at 2:17 a.m., coat on, gloves on, moved straight to the couch where I usually slept. He stood there for almost 4 minutes, just looking at the empty cushions, head tilted like he was trying to remember the shape of me in them. Then he sat down, slow, careful, like he didn't want to disturb anything. He stayed there until 4:03, unmoving, the camera catching only the back of his head and the faint rise and fall of his shoulders. When he finally stood, he walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, took out the milk I'd left behind, poured a glass, drank it slowly, rinsed the glass, put it back exactly where it had been. Then he left. The feed went dark. I sat on the floor of Mara's living room that night, laptop open, replaying the clip over and over. He hadn't touched anything else, hadn't left a note, hadn't damaged anything. He'd just sat where I sat, drank what I drank, waited in the dark for me to come home. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just kept watching until the battery died, then plugged it in and watched again. I moved again. Sublet a studio on the other side of town, no windows facing the street, 3rd floor, buzzer entry. I stopped going to Starbucks, stopped using the same routes, changed my hair, my clothes, the way I walked. I told myself it was enough. I told myself he couldn't follow forever. 3 weeks later, I came home from work and the door was unlocked. Not forced. Just open, the deadbolt turned back, the chain dangling loose. I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening. No sound from inside, no footsteps, no breathing. I pushed the door wider with my foot. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it. Bed made, dishes washed, laptop closed on the table. But on the kitchen counter was a glass. The same glass from the video. Milk still in it, half drunk, condensation beating on the outside. Next to it was another photo. Me, asleep in the studio bed last night. The nightlight I'd bought after the last one catching the side of my face. The timestamp matched the clock on my microwave. I didn't call the police this time. I packed a bag, left the glass where it was, left the photo where it was, walked out, locked the door behind me, and drove to the bus station. I bought a ticket to the furthest place the schedule went. 6 hours away, small town, no direct connections back. I sat in the back row, hood up, phone off, watching the highway lights streak past until the bus pulled into a quiet depot at 3 in the morning. I rented a room above a diner with cash. No name, no questions. I stayed inside for 3 days, ordering food to the door, sleeping in short bursts, checking the locks every hour. On the 4th day, I went downstairs to eat. The waitress was kind, asked if I was passing through. I said yes. She said the town was quiet. Good place to disappear if that's what someone needed. I smiled like it was a joke. She didn't laugh. That night I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Slow. Careful. Stopping right in front of my room. I lay there, frozen, listening. No knock, no key in the lock, just breathing, soft and even, on the other side of the wood. Then the footsteps moved away, down the hall, down the stairs, out the front door. I waited 10 minutes before I got up, checked the peephole, opened the door a crack. Empty hallway. No one on the stairs. But on the doormat was another photo. Me sitting at the diner booth that afternoon, fork halfway to my mouth, eyes on the menu. The timestamp was 4 hours earlier. I left the next morning before dawn. Took a different bus, then a train, then another bus. I stopped using my real name, stopped using cards, stopped looking at my reflection too long because I kept expecting to see him standing behind me. I still check locks. I still wake up listening for footsteps. I still see the glass of milk in every kitchen I walk past, half full. Condensation beating on the outside like it's been waiting for me. He never spoke to me again after that first day in Starbucks. Never left a note. Never made a threat. He just watched, waited, sat in my empty apartment, drank my milk, took my picture while I slept, followed me across state lines without ever needing to ask where I was going. I don't know if he's still out there. I don't know if he ever stopped. I just know that every time I close my eyes, I see the silhouette in the moonlight above my bed, the way it didn't move, the way it waited. And I know that somewhere, in some quiet town, in some small room above a diner, he's probably sitting right now, watching, waiting for me to come home.